my name's Alyssa and I'm going to show you how to sew the Mabel dress pattern. And this comes in extra small through 5X. And if you're assembling the pattern at home, you'll need a printer or access to a printer and tape and paper scissors. And for sewing, you'll need fabric scissors, pins, a seam ripper. This is optional, you don't have to use this, but this is a razor blade that I sometimes use instead of a seam ripper because it's faster. You just have to be careful not to cut yourself or the fabric if you're using that. Measuring tape. Sewing a knitting gauge. You don't need this, but I find this helpful for when I'm doing facings and folding seam allowance under that needs to be a certain width. It makes it pretty easy for measuring that out. Something to mark the fabric with. This is a pen by Pilot called Friction that irons off. You can also use chalk. This is optional. This is a 1/4 inch elastic. You only need about 12 inches of it for this pattern if you're going to use this for the gathering method that I like to do instead of hand basting. A loop turner. This is one that I made myself out of wire. I do use this sometimes, or I did. I like this a lot better, but whenever I'm turning things inside out with this, I'm always so anxious that the fabric's gonna come off of this hook, and it's just, I don't like it. So I made this loop turner out of wire, and I just turned one end so it can go through whatever it is, a tie or a belt, and it won't snag. And then I attached a safety pin to the other end so it can hook onto the fabric and it won't come off. And I also like this because it's long, so it's good for belts and waist ties. And you'll need about 2.5 yards of fabric for all sizes, extra small through 5X. You can get away with using 2 yards for the extra small. I'm using 100% cotton quilting fabric that I got at a salvage store. If you're able to find a fabric, especially that's a natural fiber, at a thrift store or a salvage store, that's great. And you'll also need an iron, thread, and a sewing machine. You don't need a serger because all of the seams are French seamed. The first thing we're going to do is take the back dress piece and sew a double fold hem. So I'm going to fold over the edge 1/4 inch. I'm going to measure it and then fold it over 1/4 inch again. And when I'm doing a hem, I measure just in the beginning, and then while I'm sewing, I eyeball it the rest of the way. And I'm going to sew along that edge there. And then this is how I sew the hem to keep it from getting a rippled effect that sometimes happens when there's a slight curve. So I'll sew a little bit and then I'll turn it over 1/4 inch and then turn it over again. And then I make sure that this is flat, and I'm not really holding this super tight. I'm just letting it kind of fall where it wants to go, and then sew, and then just keep turning it over whenever I get to, once my finger gets up there. And the reason why I like doing the front and the back hem first and also separately before they're attached to each other is because I think it helps the hem to not get rippled. When you're sewing the entire hem, once it's all together, I feel like the chances of it getting rippled are higher, and I like doing the front and the back separately. I was taught in school to always do the hem last, which makes sense. Because if you do it last, you can make sure that the hem is perfectly even. But if you cut out the fabric nicely and your sewing is consistent, there shouldn't be an issue. I also put my eyeliner on after mascara, so I think I'm just naturally someone that does things backwards. But I don't know, I like it this way. So. Press the hem and then repeat the same thing for the hem on the front dress piece. I just sewed the hem of the front dress piece, and now I'm going to attach the front slit facing. So I have the front dress piece with the right side facing up. The right side is the outside and the wrong side is the inside of the fabric. And I have my front slit facing piece here, and what I'm going to do is have it so the right sides are touching. So the wrong side of the front slit facing is pointed up and the center front notches are together. And then I'm going to take the slit facing pattern piece and transfer the stitch line onto the facing. So I'm going to mark there, and then I'm going to fold this under where the stitch line ends and mark. And then with a ruler or any straight edge, just connect the two together. And then put some pins in, and then sew along this line. Now I'm going to cut a slit in between the stitches, and when I get to about 1/8 of an inch away from the bottom, I'm going to cut a little notch towards each corner so it looks like a little Y, and that will help it from wrinkling once this is turned over to the other side. Now I'm going to turn the facing over to the other side and press, and then once it's over here, turn in the edge a 1/2 inch all the way around and pin it so it stays in place, and then press. Now I'm going to pin the facing down and then top stitch all along the edge there. When I get to the bottom of the facing, I think it's called walking the hand wheel. I'm not positive if that's the right term, but that thing that's on the side of the sewing machine, that circle, I basically just kind of hold on to it and make sure it doesn't go too fast so that I have a bit more control over the speed of the sewing machine and also where the fabric is going. And this is a helpful thing to do if you're new to top stitching, is just to have one hand on the hand wheel and the other hand guiding where the fabric is going. It helps to keep your stitches even though it's slower, but it's better than having to seam rip it out if it looks bad. Press the facing. Now I'm going to put the front dress aside and work on the front ties. So I'm going to turn this so the wrong side is facing up, and I'm going to fold in one edge 1/2 inch and then press. And then I'm going to fold it so the right sides are touching together and then press. And then sew 1/2 inch all along there and then trim off the seam allowance. And then press before trimming off the seam allowance. Now turn the tie inside out with a loop turner. And so I'm going to use my homemade one. And I'm putting this through so the raw edge is the one that gets attached to the hook. Okay, now press the tie. Now, top stitch all along the edge. Press and then repeat for the other tie. I'm done with both ties, so I'm going to put those aside and work on the strap. So I have my strap ruffle here with the wrong side facing up, and I'm going to do a baby fold hem along the edge that's longer. So I'm going to turn the edge up 3/16 of an inch and then again 3/16 of an inch and stitch along that edge there. Press the ruffle. Now I'm going to take one of the strap binding pieces and gather this edge so that it fits into the binding like that. And you can use whatever gathering method you like. You can do the hand basting, which is when you take a needle and thread and loosely do a line of stitches and then pull the thread and it gathers this. I personally like using an elastic to create the gathers because it makes them very even, and I'm not that good at hand basting. I'm never happy with it. So I like this method. And so what I do is measure this strap binding part and I take off like 1/2 inch because this stretches out a little bit, and I mark it with a pin instead of cutting this off because this is going to be removed after, and I reuse this elastic a lot for gathers. So I'm going to fold the ruffle in half to find the middle and put a pin there. And then right now the ruffle, the right side is facing up. And then I'm going to fold this elastic in half to find the middle and then pin it to the edge. And then I'm going to pin this other end over here. And then pin this over here. I'm going to pin this a little bit further down so there's room to start sewing. So I'm going to sew the elastic onto the ruffle, and while I'm sewing, I'm going to stretch out the elastic and that'll create the gathers. I'm going to make sure that the elastic is just on the edge there while I'm sewing. I have the strap ruffle facing right side up and also the strap binding facing right side up. And what I'm going to do is pin this on top of the binding. So I'm going to pin it to the edge, and the ruffle kind of comes out at the side here. So I'm going to make sure that that is lined up with the binding. And I'm going to fold the ruffle in half to find the middle and put a pin in. And then also fold the binding in half to find the middle. And pin those two together. So now I'm going to pin the rest of this to make sure that the two edges are matching up together. And then I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch all the way down. And I'm just going to make sure that the ruffle on each end is lined up with the binding when I'm sewing. Now I'm going to take these pins out and then seam rip this elastic off and then clean off all of the little threads on it. Press the ruffle. And now carefully trim off the seam allowance. Now take the binding and press it so it's out like that, and this little seam allowance is going this way. Now I'm going to fold the binding so the raw edge of the binding is touching this stitch line here. I'm going to fold it and then fold it again and then pin it down. Press the binding and now top stitch all down this edge here and over here at this edge. Again, just make sure that the ruffle is lined up with the binding there on each end. So it'll be like that. press and then repeat the same thing for the other strap. I have both straps done, and you can tell the front from the back by looking at the edge, and the front strap is more narrow than the back strap or back part of the strap. And so I'm going to flip these over so the wrong sides are showing and this binding part is on the inside. And I'm going to take the front dress and have it so the wrong side is facing up, and I'm going to go up to these notches and have the first two notches I'm going to fold so that they're touching, and then this little pleat that makes is going to go towards the center front. I'm going to pin it, and then I'm going to go over to the next two notches and fold them together, and then fold that towards the center front again. And then I'm gonna go and just kind of fold this. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to fold it like this and then press that down. And then on the extra small through extra large, there's another notch over here to mark where the strap begins. And on the 1X to the 5X, there isn't an extra notch right here. The strap starting point is that last notch that was matched to make this pleat. So I'm going to take the strap and have it so the right side is facing up and match this binding edge with the strap starting point, and then pin. And then I'm going to make sure that the edge of the strap matches up with the front dress piece over here. And now I'm just going to lay this so it's going over this way. And I'm going to take one of the front facing pieces, and I have it so the wrong side of this facing is pointed up, and I'm going to pin it along here. And then at the front, I'm going to fold this over so that it matches up with that edge, and then I'll press that down. Okay, now I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch all the way along the top there. And I'm going to start sewing from the center front so that I'm going with the pleats instead of sewing against them, because if I sew in this direction, these might end up getting folded over, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to sew this way. I'm now going to add some little snips and going to do them at an angle, and this will help the facing to lay flat once it's turned over to the other side. Okay, I'm going to turn this over and press. And I'm going to repress these pleats again. Now I'm going to fold under the edge here a 1/2 inch and pin it so it stays in place. I'm going to do that all along this edge, and because this is a curve, I'm going to be pinning it like this and kind of holding it up and pinning it instead of trying to do it flat kind of like that. It's not as easy. So on this curve, I'm just kind of rolling it under. Okay, now I'm going to go and add some little snips throughout here so that this lays flat. And I'm doing them at an angle. Now I'm going to press this down and then repin and make sure that these pleats right here are pressed before pinning this to here. You don't want these pleats like spread out. Oh, and before I pin this down, I'm going to add one of the ties. So I'm going to measure over 1/2 inch and put this in here at the top. So it's like that. I'll pin this here. You may have to do a little bit of adjusting right here so that this lays flat. And I'm just gonna repin this to make sure that the pleats stay flat. And now going to top stitch all along this edge here and go back down to the side seam. Press the facing. And now do the same thing to this other side. And I'll show you how to set that up again because the facing can be a bit confusing. So I'm going to turn this so the wrong side is facing up and fold these pleats again. So the pleat is going towards the front. And then press those down. Now take the other strap and with the shorter side, which is the front, place it so the right side is facing up and the edge of this binding is at the strap notch starting point, and pin. Have that go over there. And take the other front facing piece and have it so the wrong side is facing up. And then fold in this edge so it's even and press. And then sew a 1/2 inch away from the edge at the top there. And then start sewing at the center front, so you're going with the pleats. Now add angled snips. And turn this over. And repress the pleats. And then press the facing down. Take the other tie and put it into the facing a 1/2 inch in and pin. And then turn this under a 1/2 inch, pin, and then do the snips, and then repin and sew all along the outside edge. Press the facing. I'm going to put this aside and take the back dress piece and have it so the wrong side is facing up, and then I'm going to take the front of the dress and put it on top so the right side is facing up. And I'm going to match the sleeve, or match the strap up with the strap notch starting point and pin. And make sure that the strap isn't twisted, and then pin the other side. And the straps can just go like that for now. And then take the back facing piece and have it so the wrong side is facing up, and match the two center back notches together and pin. And then pin the rest of this to the back. Now sew a 1/2 inch away from the edge at the top there. Now going to add some angled snips all along the outside edge. Okay, now flip this over and press. Going to turn under the edge a 1/2 inch again, like how I did it on the front, and pin it, and then add some little snips again, and then pin this down. I'm going to do a row of stitches. I'm going to top stitch along this edge here, and then I'm going to top stitch along that edge. Press the facing. Now I'm going to sew the side seams. So I'm going to put the wrong sides together so that they're touching, and then sew 1/4 of an inch all the way down, and then trim off the seam allowance. I'm going to flip this over to the other side and press. Now sew another line of stitches 1/4 inch all the way down, and then repeat the same thing on the other side. I just finished the other side seam, and now I'm going to press both sides. And now tie a bow. And the dress part is done. Now I'll show you how to do the optional waist tie. I have my waist tie piece with the wrong side facing up, and I'm going to turn in each end 1/2 an inch and then press. And then I'm going to turn this so the right sides are touching, and I'm going to fold it in half and press. And now I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the raw edge, and then trim off the seam allowance. Now, turn this inside out and then press. Now, if you'd like to go a step further, you can also add a little threaded belt loop to the side if you're going to want to always have this on the dress. I like just having this as an option without the belt loops, so I can wear it without the waist tie and not have little loops sticking out at the side. But if you always want to have the waist tie on there, I'll show you how to make a little belt loop out of thread. So I'm going to take, this is just the thread that I was using for when I was sewing the dress, and take a book. This is a good book, by the way, if you like Jeff Buckley. I'm going to wrap this around 4 times. And trim this off. And then I'm going to tie a knot at the top here. And so now I'm going to do a zigzag stitch on top of this, and I'm going to put the length on my sewing machine to 4. It's the longest length on there, and I'm going to start sewing below this knot up here. Now I have this little threaded loop, and this does take a little bit of practice. You might have to go over this a couple of times if you miss one of the little strings. But you can take now any needle that has an eye big enough to fit this thread in and then sew it into the side seams.